So Patrick, you and John put together the InPlace Taking It to the Cloud event a few years ago now. What moved you to do that?
What moved us to do that? Well, gosh, I don't know why anybody would ask us that after all the effort and time and trouble with doing it. But look, we felt there was a need for that. And really, our view was that in our space, which is very much professional services, legal, technology specifically, was that cloud was significant and inevitable. And we could see our colleagues around ourselves struggling to figure out a way forward for the enterprise. And we could also see that providers were struggling to offer a dialogue that gave comfort. So people, whether in a private or professional sense, have really in recent years become remarkably accustomed and accepting to cloud, and we felt that there was room for a conference around this. So to answer your question, it started out really as a way of bringing smart people together to promote dialogue on cloud within professional services. And you know, there was also a little bit of history around it. We thought that that was an opportunity that would come and go very quickly, and I think that's held true. We thought there was a moment of innovation that was occurring within the marketplace that we may not see again. A whole lot of factors were coming together, and I think that's why it's worked well for us, even though we probably feel that that particular topic has run its course, and that's the other surprising part of it as well. For us, I guess, in a historical sense, cloud is really something which is really enabling the knowledge workers today in a very, very big way. And that's our user base, that's our colleagues, that's the industry that we're in. And we liken that to really what you saw about 100 years ago with the working class moving into new types of jobs as a result of technology. We see the same sort of thing with cloud and knowledge workers.
That's really interesting. You know, I think that pace of change is really quite astonishing. Normally it just goes past, you don't notice it happening, but you know, in the 3 years of hosting the event, is it that people have been saying the same thing, the presenters have been saying the same thing, or has it changed over time?
Well, look, it's actually been changed a lot by advancement. And I think you're right. This is one of those moments. And actually, although we talk about the world and the world of technology and the world of process and the world of practice changing very, very quickly, if we again look at that, 100 years ago, and 100 years ago, we were still in the middle of the First World War, I think change was just as rapid then, and in some ways more far-reaching. But what we've been finding with our delegates and with our providers and with all the different participants in taking it to the cloud is that the change has been remarkably rapid, and more rapid than I would have thought. So, you know, we would have said that that really the advancement that's been taking place there has been occurring on all sides. It's been occurring in terms of policy, it's been occurring in terms of regulation, it's been occurring in terms of solutions that are coming to the marketplace. Not always, but in the main, and customers have been surprisingly ready. So in a way, you could say that consumers of cloud services were interested 3 years ago. They've done an about face, and they're very actively involved in consuming those sorts of services on behalf of their organisations. And I think the next stage will be pretty interesting as we see how that transpires. I'll give you an example of that. In year one, when we first ran this conference, firms were really just tinkering. So they were really thinkers and they were tinkers. And that's pretty much where they were. But in year two, we started to see strategies on the table. We started to see policies, and we started to see frameworks emerge. And we also started to see keystone providers in the marketplace, whether it was in document management, whether it was in CRM, start to come forward with really, really cogent solutions for firms that were not only relevant and enticing, but at the same time, you started to see policy problems such as data sovereignty and privacy being solved in a way internally by firms. And so, although the costs remained high and the technical risks remained high, firms were getting in there and starting to become active. And then in the third year that we ran that, which was recently, and we run a survey, by the way, before every conference with about 50 or 60 firms or so, and we can see that in practice that firms are well underway, that many strategies are being employed, and that's interesting. Because what it's saying is that it's blossomed from something that people were really wondering about a few years ago to something which firms are very actively involved with today. And their providers, their counterparties, their stakeholders in the marketplace are responding to as well with the same amount of enthusiasm.
So it's unusual for a conservative market, that's a lot of pressure to put on all sorts of people within the professional service firms. What do you think it's doing to the classic role of the IT team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that it's probably on the whole being embraced by IT. And I wouldn't have said that this was always the case. And I know my colleague John Ducker always felt that IT as gatekeepers weren't doing really the perfect job for their organisations because there were, solutions being proffered, especially by cloud-based providers, and there are lots of reasons why that might be, which are worth exploring themselves, but that often there was a great deal of resistance. But in fact, I would say that resistance was really out of diligence, and that IT groups were concerned about really making sure that embarking upon those solutions was done in a way that really made sure that the outcomes performed well. So your IT people are smart because they've been burned many times before. And so I think they were naturally conservative out of past experience, and that made sense. And now that they're able to see, and this is another wonderful thing about cloud, it's very easy to prove a lot of the environments around cloud, to bring out a proof of concept, etc. And they can quickly see that it's getting them out of, the tyranny of upgrades, for example, for on-premises equipment. It's getting them out of the tyranny of having to build infrastructure. They can virtualize much more easily. Remember that IT groups were virtualizing for many years. So the concepts are not strange to them. It was really about whether the promise and the performance was there. And now they've been seeing that. They've been jumping in wholeheartedly, and they've been changing accordingly to embrace opportunities that now become available to them. So I think on the whole it's actually positive now, although it may not have seemed that way a few years ago.
Yeah, it did seem a little confused. So if you were, I think my perception of the market is the very large end of town, they have the resources and the infrastructure to really know and understand this journey. I hesitate to use words, but they've been able to invest in getting the right people and knowledge to understand the cloud direction. At the smaller end, it just was commercially sensible. You could just hop online, get things, somebody else dealt with security, enough. But I think it's the mid-tier that are still perhaps with a foot in both camps of maybe the old world and the new world. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's probably fair. I mean, most of the mid-tier firms are big enough to have a lot of kit, a lot of process, and a desire to have policies and strategies in place to be like their large counterparties. So they're exposed to many of the same risks, and yet they probably don't have the scale. That's probably right. While if you're a small organisation, you're a breakaway, let's say, then, practice in a box, for example, which I can now go online and purchase and for a monthly fee or something like that, makes it incredibly viable and cost effective to do so. So I think that's probably right. I think probably at the large end, there is a case to say the larger firms are probably bigger winners. And probably what you're seeing as a result of that is that by eking the scale and savings out of cloud, they're able to set themselves apart. And I think for mid-tier firms, it's all around now specialising. And again, our survey is saying that to us. When we ask firms, what are they doing in the cloud space and what's their strategy? What we're seeing is, in fact, there's no dominant strategy. So some are embarking on hybrid approaches. Some are saying it's going to be cloud first. Others are saying it's SaaS, and in about equal measure. Yeah. What we have noticed is that managed services are falling away. So we wonder whether managed services will be a loser out of all of this. But at the end of the day, whether you're small and you're saying, well, it's affordable, I can move faster, I can be more nimble, whether you're large and you're saying, well, look, I can now differentiate and be defensive, or whether you're in the middle and say, well, now I can specialise in what we do best. I think that's a differing factor. And several years ago, everybody bought the same kit. Everybody had the same approach. The small guys suffered from lack of scale. The large guys suffered from complexity. So I think what we're seeing is a different type of field. Whether it's level or not, I can't tell you at this stage, but we're playing in different fields. And that level of specialisation, I think, will bring about rich results, especially for consumers of legal services.
So Patrick, if you're a law firm still perhaps in that halfway stage, what advice would you have for those firms?
It's a good question, Andrew. I'm not sure whether you'd want to take a lot of advice from me, but I can tell you what others are saying. So, and I suppose therein lies the answer. Talk to others, talk to your peers and talk to others. I think you'll get very good and rich responses from your colleagues. For example, at Taking to the Cloud 2019, Beresson Moore, IT Director of Cause Chambers Westgard, she advised driving your suppliers hard to achieve your specific needs. And she made the observation that in the SaaS world and in the consumption world, why would that not be the case? So don't simply sign up to what's on offer. Try and influence that, because the whole cloud dynamic, because essentially you're consuming something over the web or over the internet, which is really often a multi-tenanted service. Really the purpose of the provider is to provide for you in a way that you wish to consume. And I thought that was quite interesting. I think also then to add on top of that, and this is kind of more obvious, is that due diligence is important. So I think that wherever you're engaging, whatever your strategy happens to be, look for clear, agreed performance metrics and try and make sure you're getting a scale or network benefit with whichever cloud solution you're looking for. Because part of the idea of really saying, look, I'm going to sign up to your processes, your IP, your offerings, and give away mine, is to essentially get the benefits of a large community. Moreover, I would say that you need to focus on data less than applications and less than your own IP. So functionality, user interface adoption, of course, is really critical in whatever you do, but ultimately you're ceding IP to the cloud provider for processes, software functionality. They will own that now. And so the value that you retain is your data, and it's what you do with that data which is so important. How are you going to use it? How will it be controlled? How will it be audited? How will you leverage it to the advantage of your stakeholders? Whether it's through advances in big data, artificial intelligence, integrations, whatever that may be. So I would say make sure you have a good data management strategy and focus on that, because that will be the commodity which you retain value in down the track. And of course, you need to have a good exit strategy to make sure that you keep your provider honest. You need to be able to switch.
Yep, that's really interesting. And I know I was listening when I did the panel at the Sydney event. That was one of Peter Campbell's comments from Hall and Wilcox about that aspect of the importance of data and the swappability, which isn't quite there yet. That flexibility, agility, which is still the promise.
Yeah, the term Peter used was interoperability. I wish I'd come up with that term. He's always ahead of young Peter. Yeah, but I think that's right. I thought that was quite an insight. Look for interoperability.
Yeah. And looking to the future, are you and InPlace thinking of an event again next year?
Look, we are thinking of an event. The problem is, what do we do with our event? Because we think that taking IT to the cloud has done its dash. IT is really heavily into the cloud, and so they're a little bit like Buzz Lightyear. They're sort of to infinity and beyond now, and that's really astonished us how quickly that has gone. So it's been a nice little catchphrase for the last couple of years, but our community are kind of telling us by the survey, we're here already now, what's new? Now there is some new stuff, so I think the area is very rich in terms of smart people, stakeholders within firms getting together to talk about tech, because what we're seeing is there's an increasing tendency for tech to affect the CEO, the COO, and the board. And that's driving a lot of activity there. And I think the role of your IT group and your CIOs is to make sure that the leaders of the organisations don't dumb it down. Just because we've got cloud, because we've got new capabilities, and it looks nice and it looks easy, it's still complex, I think. And so the areas I think that we'll start to see, which would make sense for conference, are really much more of the specialised areas that we're starting to see emerge. And, you know, Andrea, and you'll know because you hosted one of our panels, thank you very much, that we were saying that really, you know, it's very hard to come up with topics these days for panels because firms are doing so many things. So it's a different world today. So at the moment, we're going to sort of hang it all out there, have a look at what we think will be trendy, but it may be that we have something which is a little bit more varied next time around.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Patrick. It's been fascinating as ever to talk to you, and I hope to talk to you again.
It's a pleasure, Andrea. Always a pleasure talking to you.